now you bring back a couple of million soldiers who are now expert at killing and mugging and raping and looting, and they don't want to just go back to nothing. And so that's when you get the revolution starting, usually from disgruntled leaders who have disgruntled soldiers of a certain size. And so he said, this is what is going to happen. And Putin knows the history. If he comes back, he can't whitewash that he didn't get all of Ukraine after saying he wanted all of Ukraine. And that will constitute a defeat. And that will mean the re-emergence of all the soldiers will return. And they will have done all of that for nothing. And they're going to be angry. And he's going to lose power and possibly his life.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And this time we are joined by Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Diane is editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics, including the war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia. Diane, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Good to see you.
So it does look like after this flurry of diplomatic activity and military planning meetings, that the Kremlin is trying to frame Ukraine's allies and as an obstacle to peace when you look at the kind of statements that are being made by the likes of Sergei Lavrov, who's saying the coalition of the willing is undermining peace in Ukraine. I presume we could expect more of this, and that also President Zelensky will be a target too.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is no percentage or gain for Russia in sitting down and talking about peace, because they're increasing their battle line troop complement. They have faced no serious sanctions. Their oil customers, with the exception of India, haven't been sanctioned. They haven't flooded, the West hasn't flooded Ukraine with weapons to pummel the heck out of Russia and its troops. So why would he do anything? He hasn't even been asked to make a simple concession. So he is continuing to foot drag, slow walk, whatever you want to say, but he likes it just the way it is. He's just being completely impossible to negotiate with.
And it's been suggested to me that the only reason any of these meetings have been taking place is to keep President Trump happy, and it's all a bit of a smokescreen to make it look as though things are going okay or progressing.
I don't take that cynical view. I'm not a big fan of Trump's, but he is trying, and I think he sincerely wants to, but he doesn't know what he's doing. That's the problem. First of all, I really don't think they comprehend. He and his team comprehend the fact that Putin does not want to stop the war. And if he did, he wouldn't be engaged in these processes of meetings. He would have just stopped it because he started it. It's completely within his power to have stopped it, and he has not. So the fact that Trump continues to say, well, let's talk about it, is pointless, because he just simply has to add pressure. And even that may not work, but he's doing nothing now except shuffling around from here to there. And the Europeans also are sincerely interested in putting boots on the ground in the form of security guarantees. But Trump is not, Putin is not going to go for that. He's already, a spokesman of him has already said that a contingent of soldiers from NATO countries would constitute an attack by NATO. So and they would say that's the beginning of World War III. So they're scaring them away from that notion as well. Look, this is passive aggressive diplomacy, and Trump does not understand. He's got to finally get real about this and tough with the guy.
Donald Trump conceded this week that Russian President Vladimir Putin might not want to make a deal after all, saying we'll find out in a couple of weeks. Not much of a cliffhanger, is it? We already know, don't we?
Well, I think we do. And Trump even pulled a Munich 1938 move, because he apparently agreed that, Putin could, well, maybe we can get this done. So you want that little piece of Donetsk? You can have that. And of course, that is just the slippery slope. And that's what Hitler got out of Czechoslovakia. And that little piece of Donetsk will be a springboard for further invasions into Ukraine if it is handed over to Putin, because they've been unable to get through and pass through it. and it's holding up their front line from moving further and deeper into Ukraine. So to give up something that strategic, or to give up anything in return for nothing, he's not asked Putin to do a single thing except ceasefire, and he's ignored that twice.
And have the talks, do you think, then in Alaska, then Washington made any difference at all?
No, they didn't move the dial. It made a difference to Putin. He appears to be, he has the stature of having a two-way summit with the most powerful man in the world. And he also can say that he's, attempting and he's trying to reach some kind of an agreement to stop this terrible war, when he can do it with a phone call. But it serves his purposes because there has been no gain. Trump looks okay to his population. The Europeans are trying their bit, and Putin continues to kill people.
What options does President Zelensky have if only he and never President Putin actually feels the pressure?
Well, I think Zelensky can just do more of what he's doing. I mean, the guy's heroic. But, the Americans have to give more weaponry to the Ukrainians, who are willing to take on this continuing battle themselves, because they probably will have to, and just bombard the heck out of Russia, cause them real pain and damage. And then the best revenge, the best attack of all, is the economic one, and that is very severe sanctions on Russia. Trump has gone around, sanctioning, putting tariffs all over the place with his allies. He hasn't touched Russia. And also to impose these draconian secondary sanctions that are in the Senate now, of up to 100% on all of Russia's oil customers. That's got to happen. You got to crush him.
Before the Alaska summit, Putin had talked about wanting a ceasefire, and he had talked about putting sanctions on, and none of that happened. And now it's a volte-face, and he's basically saying he wants to work immediately on a permanent peace process rather than the ceasefire. It presents a real opportunity for President Putin. What do you think will happen? What do you think he'll do with that opportunity in the next couple of weeks?
Continue to bomb Ukrainians. He's stepped up his bombing. I mean, he's just snubbing his nose. He's making light of it. He's enjoying this because he looks like he's interested in peacemaking, while he's continuing to destroy the country he wants to obliterate without any major consequences. He also isn't isolated anymore. I mean, the President of the United States met with him. He's doing booming trade with a lot of the members of the BRIC Association, India and China. His oil customers haven't been affected in the least. And so, it's business as usual, and he's doing quite well. He's not going to do anything. This is passive aggressive.
And President Trump is a man in a rush. He says he is anyway, and he has this great urgency, he says, to genuinely save lives, and yet by not putting pressure on Putin, the opposite is happening and the people continue to die. But then he does have this date looming, which is the Nobel Peace Prize in October, doesn't he, which he would like to secure. Do you think that is the reason behind the rush, or is he just in danger of losing patience and losing interest?
I cannot believe that he is in the running for a Nobel Peace Prize. He thinks he is, but he actually apparently made a phone call to one of the judges to lobby for himself. I mean, it's irrelevant, even if he gets it, which I doubt he will or deserve. So all his scurrying around is because he is completely devoid of any understanding of the DNA of Russia or the history or what he's dealing with. As I said in my recent newsletter, Trump and these people are acting like cops who are trying to reason with a guy with a suicide vest on, who's armed to the teeth and wants to kill everybody. You don't do it by reasoning with them or meeting with them. And you have to use brute force. And brute force in this case, we don't want to start the World War III, but brute force would be serious sanctions. And they're just sitting there waiting for him to approve them. 100% tariffs on India and China will do, and that includes Turkey and Hungary. That will do the trick. That will really, really cause pain in Russia.
And meanwhile, a report in the Kyiv Independent details the build-up of military infrastructure by Russia in the occupied territories. It says it's akin to turning a part of Ukraine to a huge military base. The longer the war goes on, the deeper the Russian roots go, to a point that you wonder whether or not they will ever be able to be extracted.
Well, that's another reason. This has to come to a head. This has to stop. He has to cripple the economy and the military machine of Russia. And he's got to do it quickly. The West has got to do this quickly because of that reason. But also, I also worry about Belarus. They've put nuclear things in Belarus. I mean, they kind of control it, but they don't outright control it, but they will. And they're moving in there. And that's the next step. And so, you get a piece of Donetsk, you keep building up your forces. And the other thing that's worrisome is that while he's talking peace, he's increasing the number of conscripts and troops and equipment going into the part of Ukraine that he's already conquered. And that is in preparation for another drive westward. He wants to go to the Polish border. He wants to go to the Finnish border.
I'm glad you mentioned Belarus because the next joint military exercises between Belarus and the Russian Federation are going to take place next month. And there are more troops taking part than ever before. The last time, though, that exercise took place was just before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The US envoy, General Kellogg, went there recently to Belarus and met with President Lukashenko. What do you think his brief was?
Oh, Kellogg. Well, he's working for Trump. He does understand the Ukrainian situation. In fact, he has a daughter that's helping, disperse aid all over Ukraine. But he's going there. I guess it was kind of a investigative session to sort of feel out what's going on with Lukashenko. But I think that, as you pointed out, history may repeat. In other words, if you amass enormous numbers of troops for a so-called war games on the border of potential countries you want to invade, I think you're looking at a possible buildup for another assault. And I don't think it's crazy because, Putin has been testing all along Trump, and nothing has stopped Trump from just appeasement and trying to be reasonable and setting up meetings to agree, only to agree to another meeting. And, this is just, he's got him running around in circles. Trump has not got it. He hasn't understood that what he's dealing with is a lethal, a lethal man with a huge army and a nuclear arsenal who ain't going to stop unless he's somehow crippled.
And what do you think it will mean if Belarus is actually drawn back into the Russian Federation effectively by a velvet revolution?
Well, that's horrific. It really is horrific. They tried a revolution as Ukraine did, and they failed. They were slammed. Lukashenko brought in Russian troops to put down all of the dissidents, and many of them fled. So, it's been in the grips of Russia once removed ever since it tried its revolution and failed. But it is a large landmass. It hasn't got a lot of people, about 10 million, but it's the size of France. And, if it agrees to host thousands upon thousands of Russian troops and build them facilities and back channel supply chains and all that sort of thing, then you've got a wider front than you had before just inside Ukraine. You have a much wider front. And Ukraine will have a front from the north.
We have spoken many times before about how the Europeans need to step up in all of this. And after the round table that we saw at the beginning of this week in Washington, do you actually think they're genuinely beginning to do this in an effective way, and that the planning for security guarantees and fresh sanctions that are being considered, that may follow, are actually going to hold any sway in all of this?
I think it's helpful. I applaud the Europeans. I think the British, the French, and the Germans and the Polish are really leading the way. They are absolutely essential to fixing this. And, they are willing to put boots on the ground, but that's very tricky and very troublesome because, as I mentioned, I think a spokesman from the Kremlin made no bones about it, that any soldier from a NATO country will on Ukrainian soil or fighting against Russian soldiers will be considered an act of war by Ukraine, by NATO. And so it's tricky, it's dangerous, and but they're talking it up. They're willing to do it. But I think at the end of the day, the most powerful man in the world, Trump, has to understand he's dealing with someone that has to be crippled because you can't reason, you can't appease. He wants it all, and Trump has to get this. He has to understand this.
I mean, do you
because
think
he's
it's
the one.
is it really a question of misunderstanding or unwillingness?
I hope it's not willingness. I hope it's not willingness. No, I think it's just plain ignorance. I don't think he reads history. I don't think he studied history. He doesn't know anything about it. I mean, I recently also came across an open letter by Edward Topol, who's a Russian expert novelist, historian, artist. And he said, look, you don't understand. Putin has to keep the war going. He has to, because every time Russia has withdrawn from an unsuccessful war, there has been a revolution and an overthrow of the government. So he absolutely has a rational reason to continue this war, Putin. And as he does, he's gaining, I guess, this and that from it. But if you don't understand that you're dealing with someone who has a suicide vest on and an arsenal of weaponry and wants to kill you, you don't sit down and chat with them. You don't. You don't offer them enticements. You don't offer them appeasement or bribes. You have to fight them.
Can you tell me a bit more? I mean, you wrote about this in your Substack. Can you tell me a bit more about the reasoning of this point of view?
Yeah, it was an interesting story. It was Edward Topol, and he's a Russian and he's an expert. And he said, look, every war in the history of Russia up until Afghanistan, which was in 91 or so, every war that the Russians have lost, when the troops come home, there's an overthrow, there's a revolution. And the last one was they walked out of Afghanistan after losing, as many people as proportionally as they're losing in Ukraine. They walked away from it. And he explained, he said, now you bring back a couple of million soldiers who are now expert at killing and mugging and raping and looting, and they don't want to just go back to nothing. And so that's when you get the revolution starting, usually from disgruntled leaders who have disgruntled soldiers of a certain size. And so he said, this is what is going to happen. And Putin knows the history. If he comes back, he can't whitewash that he didn't get all of Ukraine after saying he wanted all of Ukraine. And that will constitute a defeat. And that will mean the re-emergence of all the soldiers will return. And they will have done all of that for nothing. And they're going to be angry. And he's going to lose power and possibly his life. And so Topol said, he can't stop. And that's another reason why, the Americans have to get real and smarten up and understand that they've got it. They can't negotiate a deal. They've got to defeat Russia.
So you think the meeting in Alaska was a mistake, a big mistake, was it?
The meeting in Alaska was a mistake. And the meeting in Washington was an important show of solidarity on the part of Europe and the United States. So in that sense, it was very important. But as far as leading to a trilateral or anything consequential, I really think the boots on the ground thing has been kiboshed by the statement from the Kremlin that, you don't dare do that because now you're going to start the big one. And that, of course, has to give people pause.
And not only that, if, as you say, Putin wants and has to keep the war going, there is going to be no ceasefire. There is going to be no international military deployment of the likes that are being discussed at the moment. So this is all a distraction. He's
playing along with it because he can continue his war. He hasn't stopped the war. He's bombing the heck out of Ukraine as people are talking and greeting him in on the red carpet and whatever else. He's his murderous trail continues, and so it's really tragic that we're at a point where the leader of the free world, if you like, Trump, is totally naive and not well-meaning, just naive, just and absolutely ignorant of history, and he has done no homework on who he's up against. If he thinks that Putin has a shred of decency and or a shred of greed that will get him to somehow stop this for a price, he's dead wrong. And why everybody else knows that and he doesn't, I don't get it.
Is part of the problem, or is actually the concrete thing that has come out of this flurry of diplomatic activity is that actually it has crystallized and made very clear the two different paths and approaches that the US and Europe have towards this war at the moment. They really are on different tracks.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But I think that there's a couple of things that everybody agrees to. And Germany led it by writing a check. Europeans are saying, okay, we get it. You put a lot of money into this. This is our immediate region. It's our problem. And they're paying for all the American weaponry that Ukraine needs at the moment, 90 billion, I think, recently. And so that has got to continue. They have got to buy as much weaponry as Ukraine can possibly utilize to try and stall or stop the onslaught from Putin. And then the other thing is Lindsey Graham's crippling sanctions against oil customers. That has to happen. I mean, why did he put 25% oil tariff, Trump, on India and nothing on China? And it makes no sense. And he hasn't applied those sanctions on anyone else. I mean, okay, it would be disruptive. Turkey wouldn't be happy. Brazil wouldn't be happy. South Africa wouldn't. But we're talking about a man who's out to destroy and conquer the world. And so I think that, you've just got to pull the pin on it. Got to pull the pin on it. I don't know what that will take.
And a man who's also out to get President Zelensky and President Putin to meet. Do you think that is going to happen?
I don't think, look, I don't think it would do any good even if it did. I think Putin thinks Zelensky's beneath him. I don't think he'd meet one-on-one with him because of that. And I think it's very dangerous for Trump to think he can get these two guys in a room and work it all out between them when one is desperately being bombed and assailed by the other, and without any kind of hope that this will stop. So we're in a really difficult place unless and until the Europeans finally get through to Trump that they've all got to get real about this. And that includes, by the way, Europe has been buying Russian oil and gas. Some European countries have been buying Russian oil and gas throughout this whole piece. And so, they haven't been exactly smart about it either. So I can't, I'm starting to repeat myself, but, we're at a brick wall. I'm afraid we're at a brick wall.
So what are your friends in Ukraine telling you about all of this?
Well, they're disappointed, beyond disappointed. They're being bombed. It's horrific. I mean, I have friends that spend as much time in a bomb shelter as they do above ground. The people in the countryside seem to be unaffected, except that everybody's lost a relative or a friend. I had a woman give me a facial in Toronto the other day. I said, who's in the army? She said, my granddad. I said, your grandfather. How old is he? She said, he's 65. He's there. He's a cook. He's a cook at the front line. He's getting the food to the troops. And he's too old and his back is bad, so he hasn't got a gun. I mean, this is a level of suffering and despair and tragedy that's going on in that country, and without any provocation at all. So, it's just, that's what's going on.
You said earlier that Putin has to keep the war going. is there a scenario whereby he would accept to end it if it means a capitulation of Ukraine and he gets what he wants, or Zelensky were to be forced into that kind of position? Do you think then he would be willing to talk and to implement a ceasefire?
I don't think so. I think he has to be brought to his knees. I think he has to be, or pushed out of power somehow. But his foreign secretary Lavrov on the 19th of August, amid all these meetings, came out bluntly and said, "Hey, you just don't understand. We want all of Ukraine. It's not about a little sliver of Donetsk. Ukraine is Russian. Ukrainian people and their culture is a fraud. It belongs to us. We want it all." And he said that, the chief diplomat, amid all this diplomacy. So, why is no one listening to this? And you say, well, we'll never change their minds. But what you can do is you can bring them to their knees economically and militarily, much more so than has been done.
Diane Francis, good to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.